I've been despised by my son Keith and his wife Christina for 17 long years. With my husband Gerald already passed away, I had no one to turn to and simply endured it all. At first, I tried to reprimand Keith and Christina for their lack of effort in finding work, but they would get violent with me every time, so I eventually stopped trying. In the midst of all this, my grandson Todd was the only bright spot in my life. Raising him became my sole reason for living. Now, even he is graduating high school and leaving home. So, I made the decision to move out without telling Keith and Christina. I feel lonely, but I've resolutely moved into my new place. I've resolved to spend the rest of my life on my own. Then, I got a call from Todd. "Congrats on your graduation." "Congrats to you too, Grandma." For me, who struggled for so long, those words filled me with more joy than anything. It felt like I was finally being rewarded. But that wasn't all. Todd had a plan in mind as well, and thanks to that, I was about to be saved. I'm Teresa. 12 years after losing Gerald, I'm still working as an employee at a small company at 59 years old. To be honest, continuing to work with an aging body is quite tough, but I have my reasons for needing to keep at it. Living at home are my son Keith, his wife Christina, and my grandson Todd. They may be full-grown adults now, but perhaps due to poor upbringing, Keith's behavior isn't very good. Ever since he entered middle school, he went through an intense rebellious phase. He somehow enrolled into high school, but was constantly getting into trouble with teachers and classmates. Moreover, when he was 17, he got involved with Christina, who was always hanging out at the arcade he frequented, despite her being 2 years younger. And if you can believe it, he ended up getting her pregnant. By the time I realized, it was already too late and there was nothing I could do. The day I found out about the pregnancy, when Keith and Christina revealed it to me, I was so shocked I nearly fainted. I knew it was a possibility for high school students to get pregnant, like you see in dramas or personal accounts, but I never imagined Keith would do something like that. Gerald, who was still alive back then, was furious at Keith's selfish actions and they got into a huge fight. Gerald was a strict man, so he must have found Keith's misconduct all the more unforgivable. On top of that, I'm sure he felt his own parenting was to blame. From around that time, he started overworking himself and drinking heavily, which I believe ultimately led to his shortened lifespan. I went to apologize to Christina's parents, but it seemed they were also at their wits' end with her, and declared they wanted nothing more to do with her and cut ties completely. With nowhere else to go, Christina naturally ended up living at my house. Even after Todd was born, they made no effort to move out. Instead, they would hit me up for money and stay out playing around until late at night. That's the kind of life they lead. At first, I hoped the two of them would gain some awareness as adults. Regardless of the circumstances, I believed that now that we were family, we needed to support each other. More than anything, I couldn't let go of my wish for them to become upstanding adults. However, no matter how much I tried to advise them, not only would they ignore me, they would spew verbal abuse at me, and when it got really bad, they'd casually get physical with me. As this cycle repeated over and over, I became more afraid of their violence than of persuading them. Honestly, I felt I had failed as a mother. But with no one else to turn to, my mind was completely occupied with just trying to get through each day without incident. As a result, the two of them never tried to hold down jobs, and even if they worked part-time, it never lasted long at all. With such indolent personalities, there was no way they could raise Todd properly. It was essentially child neglect. So I stepped in as a parent figure to raise Todd. Children really are adorable. Just picturing Todd's face gave me the strength to persevere even when I was busy. I may have also felt I was atoning for my sins. It's because I couldn't raise Keith properly that I wished for Todd to live a happy life. Todd must have understood how I felt. He grew into an astonishingly easygoing and obedient child. During long vacations, I would take Todd on trips to North Carolina. Why North Carolina? Ever since I was a child, I loved the Great Smoky Mountains. No matter how much the times change, seeing the Great Smoky Mountains standing there majestically, unchanged, made me feel like I was receiving some of their power as well. Having lost Gerald, I felt uneasy about whether I would be able to live a long life. If I were to pass away before Todd grew up, who would take care of him? I wanted to stay alive at least until he reached adulthood. So by receiving energy from the Great Smoky Mountains, I hoped to stay healthy and live as long as possible. After bringing Todd there a few times, it seemed he grew fond of the Great Smoky Mountains too. Whenever he had time, he would pester me, saying he wanted to go to that spot where you could see the Great Smoky Mountains. Perhaps thanks to the power of the Great Smoky Mountains, I was able to take care of Todd without falling seriously ill. Keith and Christina were as disinterested in child rearing as ever, so I was the one dropping Todd off and picking him up from preschool, attending school events and parent-teacher conferences. Keith and Christina were so uninvolved that Todd's teachers mistook me for his mom. Raising Todd while holding down a job was definitely grueling, but unlike Keith, Todd never rebelled and remained closely attached to me. However, Keith's treatment of me grew worse year by year. "Hey, give me some money. I'm going out." "No, this is for living expenses." When I refused him like that, Keith said, "Shut up. Don't you talk back to me." He punched and kicked me in a violent outburst. "Hey, hurry up and make dinner. Why are you resting? Make dinner first, then you can rest." They would say that without lifting a finger to help with chores, even when I had just gotten home from work. Moreover, when I said to Christina, "You know, I can teach you how to cook. Why don't you try making it yourself?" She made a disgusted face. "No way. Why should I have to do that? You do it." And retorted. In other words, to them, I'm not a parent or anything of the sort. I'm just a convenient housekeeper who earns money and handles all the household chores. When I realized that's how they saw me, I became terribly sad. It was so far removed from the family life I had envisioned. Keith's heartless attitude was extremely painful. Then one day, while I was playing with Todd has it good. Actually getting raised properly. He suddenly said loudly enough for me to hear. Taken aback by his words, "What are you saying? I took plenty good care of you," I argued. Then, Keith slammed the table forcefully and started shouting. "So why do I have to live this miserable life then?" I stayed silent, not understanding what Keith meant, but his anger didn't subside. "It's all your fault. If you had raised me right, I never would have gotten Christina pregnant." Christina, who was listening nearby, made an exasperated expression. "What? That makes no sense. You're the one who seduced me, remember? What are you going on about now?" Keith apparently didn't like what Christina said. He suddenly slapped her across the face. Christina crumpled to the floor holding her face and burst into tears. "Hey, Keith. There's no need to hit her. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. It's all your fault. My job isn't going well because of you." No matter how much I scolded him, he just kept screaming and wouldn't listen to a word I said. This kind of outburst from Keith was a common occurrence, and each time, everything was made out to be my fault. But even when Keith yelled at me, rather than getting irritated, I would end up feeling sad instead. It's true that I was busy with work and may have made him feel lonely. Looking back, I had that realization. However, no matter how much you blame others, it won't make your own life any better. When he was young, Keith probably had excess energy and was able to vent his life frustrations outside the home. But as he got older, his friends dwindled and his stamina declined, so all of Keith's pent-up discontent became directed at me. And then, on one cold winter day, I ended up coming home late at night after working overtime. Blowing on my freezing hands to warm them, I opened the front door. I went straight to the living room where Keith was sitting on the sofa glaring at me. "I'm home. Sorry I'm a bit late." But Keith didn't reply. He walked up to me, snatched my bag and hurled it to the floor. "What are you doing? Hurry up and make dinner." "What?" I said, "I'm hungry, so make some damn food." Exhausted from work, I was irritated by Keith's attitude. "Dinner this, dinner that. Stop demanding it like a child. Make it yourself." But if he was the type to reflect from those words, I wouldn't be having such a hard time. Enraged by what I said, Keith grabbed my arm and started dragging me towards the front door. "Stop, that hurts." Without a word, Keith opened the front door and threw me outside. "Hey!" Ignoring my scream, he slammed the door shut and locked it. I had my house key in my bag, so I couldn't get back inside. "Please, open up," I said while pounding on the door. Suddenly, the door swung open. My relief was short-lived. Keith hurled a bucket of water at me. "It's freezing. What are you doing?" The water was so cold I thought for a moment my heart might stop. "How's that? Nice and cold, huh? That's what you get." Then Todd came running in a panic from inside. "Dad, what are you doing?" he demanded of Keith. "Shut your mouth. This doesn't concern you." Todd didn't back down even after hearing Keith yell. Watching this, I recalled the same thing happening long ago. That time, Todd got yelled at by Keith, had water thrown on him, and ended up locked outside by Keith. I had come home from work to find Todd shivering and huddled outside the front door. That's when I helped him. I didn't want him to suffer through something so awful ever again. "It's okay, Todd. This has nothing to do with you." Hearing that, Todd clenched his fists in frustration. Keith looked down on me with a malicious grin. "That's right. It's your fault, so you better apologize right here. If you don't, I won't open this door until morning." My body was shaking not just from the cold, but from an overwhelming sense of humiliation. However, nothing would change even if I tried to stay strong. Keith would likely make good on his threat and leave me out here all night. For Todd's sake too, I had no choice but to endure it and apologize. "I'm very sorry," I managed to say through my chattering teeth. The cold was rapidly sapping the heat from my drenched body. Keith smiled with satisfaction. "That's better. Now hurry up and make dinner," he said, laughing as he returned to the living room. Todd immediately rushed over to me. "Grandma, stay with me. We need to warm you up quick." He supported my body as he said that. This kind of thing was hardly rare. Even if I tried to resist, it was clear I would only get beaten down with my aged body. Still, the reason I continued living with them was the lingering guilt over not raising them right. But each time they got violent with me, I couldn't help feeling pathetic. I would get dizzy wondering how long this life would go on. Moreover, whenever I heard on the news about elderly parents being killed by their sons, I felt a sense of dread, as if seeing my own fate laid out before me. So I decided for myself that when Todd left home, that would be when I graduated from this life. And that moment arrived sooner than I expected. One day, during his senior year of high school, Todd came to me for advice. "Grandma, when I graduate, I'm going to get a job instead of going to college." I was surprised by Todd's sudden declaration. "Is that so? But are you sure? If you want to go to college, we'll find a way to make it work." Even when I said that, Todd shook his head sadly. "I'm glad you're saying that. But Grandma, you're at the age to retire now, right? And with how Dad and Mom are. But don't worry. I'm not sacrificing myself." Todd's words made my heart ache with overwhelming sadness. If only I had been more on top of things. If only Keith had held a steady job like everyone else. Then Todd wouldn't have had to feel this way. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I apologized to Todd through my pitiful tears. Fortunately, Todd's job search went smoothly and he secured a position at a company in Kentucky. Since he decided to move into the company dormitory, Todd would be leaving home right after the graduation ceremony. Keith and Christina didn't seem to show much interest in the matter. From the moment I heard about Todd's plans, I had been secretly devising my own and putting them into action. The day before Todd's graduation, as I was preparing. "Hey, about tomorrow's graduation ceremony, we're going," Keith declared. "What? Why? Why?" "Because he's our son, of course. You got a problem with that?" There wasn't really a problem. However, I felt something was off about Keith suddenly wanting to attend when he had never properly participated in child-rearing or school events before. That said, it would be odd to refuse his attendance for that reason. "All right then. Let's all attend together." When I suggested that, Christina scoffed. "What are you talking about? You don't need to come," she said coldly. "Why not? Why can't I go?" I retorted, not understanding what they meant. "You see, graduation ceremonies are pretty high profile. That's why I want to dress nicely." "That's fine, but why can't I go?" "I told you, you'll just get in the way." "How am I in the way?" "Look, there will be photos taken, right? Then you'll be in them too. Get it? Having an old hag like you in the shot will ruin a perfectly good photo." I was irritated by Christina's cruel way of speaking. If they wanted to celebrate Todd's graduation as a family, I had intended to quietly step aside. But Christina was saying she wanted to exclude me just to satisfy her own desire for recognition. Not once had I ever received a word of gratitude from Keith or Christina. It's not like I particularly wanted such words, but I at least wanted them to let me attend Todd's graduation. "Please, I really want to be at the graduation." "Yeah, right. I never even graduated high school. And that's all your fault." "Exactly. The nerve of you. Know your place at your age." I gave up trying to persuade them at that point. If I kept arguing, their erratic violence would come next. So I had no choice but to swallow my feelings and back down. "Grandma," Todd said, his face contorting with sadness. "It's okay. Keith is right, after all. Old folks should stay home." And then graduation day arrived. As soon as the ceremony ended, Todd would head to his company in Kentucky and move into the dorm. And since I was moving forward with my own plans, if things went poorly, this might be the last time I ever saw his face. "Grandma, I'm heading out now." "Do your best." Then Keith, Christina, and Todd left the house. After seeing the three of them off, I immediately made a phone call. "Thank you for everything. Actually, there's been a change of plans. No, Keith and Christina aren't home right now, so I wanted to move my things out while I have the chance. Is that so? Thank you very much. I hung up and immediately started preparing to move. A short while later, I handed off the bare minimum luggage to the movers who arrived, then I too left the house. That's right. Like Todd, I had been preparing to graduate from this life. I had already informed my company and prepared a new place to live. I wanted to tell Todd too, but I was afraid the information might leak to Keith somehow, so I couldn't bring myself to say it. If they found out I was leaving home, Keith and Christina would never allow it. Because they would be losing both their money and housekeeper at the same time. My original plan was to move out when Todd finished his graduation and Keith and Christina were away from the house, but this unexpected turn of events seemed like the perfect chance. I felt bad about Todd, but I believed he could manage on his own, and figured things would work out if I sent him a letter. So I decided to resolve my own situation. And my plan went well. I successfully moved into my new home without Keith or Christina noticing. It's located very close to a spot with a great view of the Great Smoky Mountains. Since I would be living alone anyway, I at least wanted to spend my remaining days with the Great Smoky Mountains in sight. But that wasn't the entirety of my plan. As I was catching my breath in my new home, I got a call from Keith. What? Is the graduation ceremony over already? Don't screw with me. I could hear Keith shouting over the phone. We just got home and some real estate agent showed up telling us to get out of the house. What the hell is going on? It's just as he said. I put the house up for sale. Luckily, a buyer was found right away, so you two need to move out soon. Why the hell would you sell your own house? Have you lost your mind? For my graduation. I've already moved out, so you two will have to figure out the rest on your own. That's right. I hadn't just moved, I had also put my house on the market. Even if I left the house, I was afraid that as long as they lived there, Keith and Christina would continue their indolent lifestyle. Despite the terrible treatment I endured, somewhere in my heart, I hadn't given up on Keith becoming independent. However, I realized that would be impossible with things as they were, so I decided I might as well put them in a critical situation. That way, Keith would have no choice but to work for the sake of his own livelihood, and Christina would have to support him. I wondered if my plan would work out. It was impossible to know at this stage. Still, it had to be better than continuing to live in the same place forever. However, Keith didn't seem to grasp my intentions. He was still grumbling resentfully over the phone. So now, after all this time, you're suddenly abandoning me? And you call yourself a mom? I've graduated from being a mom. Stop spouting nonsense. What about money? You sold the house, right? Where did that money go? If you mean that money, I took it all. For my retirement fund. Keith finally seemed to understand the situation he was in and started crying pathetically. Mom, I was wrong. I'm so sorry for the terrible things I've done. So please, don't abandon me. There's no way I can get a job at this point. Hearing Keith's feeble words over the phone made my heart waver for a moment. But I endured it. I'm not blaming you for what you did. I think I made you feel lonely too. That's exactly why I want you to become independent from your parents. I'm getting old now. Then at least tell me where you moved. Isn't it cruel to never see each other again? I won't demand money, so please tell me. No. I can't trust your word. Live happily with Christina. That's all I can say to you. Mom, this is the last time I'll speak with you. Make Christina happy. Goodbye." Leaving those words, I hung up the phone. I blocked Keith's number, turned off my phone and placed it on the desk, then sprawled out on the floor. Outside, it was already getting dark. The colors of the sunset filtering through the curtains faintly dyed the white ceiling a pale pink. Gazing up at that ceiling all alone, I let out a deep sigh. A sense of relief that everything went well, guilt over abandoning Keith and Christina, loneliness from being all by myself, all these feelings swirled together inside me. And memories of the past naturally flowed into my head. I had the illusion that they were being projected on the white ceiling like a screen. When I first met Gerald, the day Keith was born, the day Christina came to our house, the day Gerald passed away, and the memories with Todd. I lifted myself off the floor and headed to the next room. There, a photo of Gerald was placed. I sat in front of it. "It's just the two of us from now on," Anne murmured. Months passed. I was still working as a full-time employee. At the company's urging, I ended up extending my employment, so it seemed I could keep working for a while longer. To be honest, I had wanted to quit my job and take it easy, but considering my life in old age, I wanted to earn as much money as possible and maintain connections with people. That said, when I wasn't working, I lived quietly by myself. Today, to prepare for vacation, I headed to the supermarket near my house to shop for groceries. It was a place where Todd and I used to often gaze at the Great Smoky Mountains. Now, thanks to its prime location, it had become a supermarket and small park. After finishing my shopping, I was looking out at the Great Smoky Mountains when I suddenly got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment about answering, but decided to pick up. "Hello? Hello? Grandma? It's me. Todd." "What, Todd? What is it?" I let out a shout so loud it surprised even myself. Actually, Todd didn't have a mobile phone back then, so he shouldn't have known my number. "I bought a mobile phone right after starting my job. I was determined to call you, Grandma, so I had written down your number." "Is that so? I'm sorry for leaving like that without telling you." "No, it's okay. I knew. I happened to overhear you on the phone with a real estate agent. So I thought it was a long shot, but I found the documents you were hiding and made a note of it." "Really? I had no idea. But I'm so glad. It had been on my mind." I was truly relieved to hear Todd's voice after so long. "If you're calling now, does that mean you're on vacation from work?" "Yeah. So I came to visit." "What?" I was about to ask Todd what he meant when I suddenly felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. Startled, I turned around. There stood Todd with a huge smile on his face. "Grandma, long time no see. You surprised me. How did you know I was here?" Todd replied to my question with a proud look. "I went to the address I had written down, but you weren't there. But I just knew you'd come here. You used to bring me here a lot, remember, Grandma? The surroundings have totally changed, though." "That's true, we sure did. But in that case, you should have told me in advance. It would have been terrible if you came all this way and couldn't find me." "Actually, I didn't get a job in Kentucky. I only said that to trick Dad and Mom. I'm really working in North Carolina." "Is that so? So we were living close by all along." Todd still looked overjoyed. "That's right. You struggled because of me, Grandma. So from now on, I want to repay you even a little." "Struggled? Not at all. I was happy to raise you, Todd." I was overwhelmed by Todd's kindness. My life up until now had certainly been tough, but I felt in this moment that my desperate patience for Todd's sake was being rewarded. "I'm hoping to spend time with you whenever I have a vacation, Grandma. So let's look out at the Great Smoky Mountains together again." "Yes, let's do that." The Great Smoky Mountains seemed to quietly look on as Todd and I conversed. From then on, whenever Todd had vacation time, he would stay at my place and we would have a wonderful time together. Up until now, we couldn't spend such quality time due to Keith and Christina's harassment, so it was truly enjoyable. I had resigned myself to a lonely old age, but now it felt like a bright future had suddenly opened up before me. Before, I would just hole up in the house waiting for time to pass, but these days I actively socialize with the neighbors as well. Perhaps thanks to those efforts, I made new friends too, making each day even more fun. I was able to hear about what became of Keith and Christina through an old acquaintance. They are poor but seem to be getting by on their own somehow, so that's a relief for now. Today, I plan to go with Todd to our spot where we can see the Great Smoky Mountains. It was a constant struggle, but I'm living happily now, grateful to have finally obtained these peaceful days. A person giving birth to dropouts get left in the mountains. It's settled, Uncle Justin exclaimed with the excitement of someone who had just made plans for a holiday. Yet, what he was talking about was my future treatment. After my mother, Sabrina, passed away, leaving me alone, it seemed his plan was neither to take me in nor to leave me at an institution but to abandon me in the mountains. Which is better, being taken in by this terrible couple or being left behind? I might end up following in my mother's footsteps. That's what I thought until my mother's sister, Sarah, whom I had barely spoken to, said she would take me in. Never in my wildest dreams did I think Aunt Sarah's words would become a turning point in my life. At that time, I couldn't even imagine it. This is the story of my life's success. My name is Alice. Perhaps because I lived my younger years without ever using sunscreen, I've started to notice more spots recently, at 34. I've decided to see it as a charm point. You think otherwise? It's okay, everything depends on how you look at it. When I was young and had absolutely no interest in beauty, I grew up in the countryside where my grandparents lived. My mother had been dating my father since junior high school and got pregnant at 17. She dropped out and had me. My father continued to go to high school, thinking, maybe it's better for a man to have an education, and eventually married my mother. Afterward, while working as a car mechanic, he lived peacefully with my mother, me, and his family of 3. One day, my father suddenly passed away in an accident at work. My mother kept up a brave front, but I know she cried alone after I went to sleep. Still, in front of me, she was always strong and kind. Forced to become a single mother all of a sudden, my mother was probably advised by my grandmother. She decided to return to the countryside and raise me at her parental home. My mother must have had her fears about returning to the countryside as a single parent. Worried I would be subjected to prejudice. But, at the time, being a single mother was not at all uncommon. Thankfully, in this rural area with endless farmlands, we never faced any prejudice. On the contrary, the neighbors treated me like their own grandchild, giving me sweets whenever we met, and a girl who went to the local junior high school would play with me. I loved this warm place and, even as a child, was glad we moved here. A few years after returning to the countryside, in the winter, Uncle Justin, my mother's brother, came to visit our grandparents' house, which was also my home with his family. By then, Victoria, my cousin, had been born to Uncle Justin. Uncle Justin, who had hardly ever visited before, started coming more often after Victoria began to talk a bit. I thought he just wanted to let my grandparents see Victoria. As Uncle Justin's family visited our home more often, even as a child, I began to realize that something was off with this family. The first thing that struck me as odd was Victoria's clothes. Victoria always wore the same kind of clothes. Plain black t-shirts that looked like they could be bought cheaply at any store. The difference was only long sleeves in winter and short sleeves in summer, with the collar always stretched out. It was clear, even to a child's eye, that she probably only had 1 or 2 pieces of clothing. I heard that Uncle Justin frequently changed jobs and never lasted long anywhere. My grandparents were angry about it. I can't find a job that makes use of my excellence. Everyone is jealous and doesn't recognize my worth. But Uncle Justin insisted. As a child, I believed him, but thinking back now, Uncle Justin never worked at a renowned company. He would resign after 3 months, 2 years at most. Probably, he wasn't excellent, but rather the type who couldn't do his job well. That's why my grandparents always told him to get to know himself better, almost like a mantra. Uncle Justin was completely delusional about himself. Yet, his catchphrase was always, "Well, I have Victoria, so our future is secure." As if believing Victoria would take care of them in their old age, or planning to raise her that way. Indeed, Victoria was made to read books for elementary students before she even started kindergarten and was taught math meant for older children. The so-called gifted education sounds nice, but their true motives are clear as day. And it's not like Uncle Justin and his wife are the ones overseeing the studies. Victoria herself is just being shown drills without understanding their meaning. She doesn't grasp the content or how to solve the problems at all. Yet, Uncle Justin and his wife criticize her harshly, saying, "Why can't you do even this?" and force her to study more, claiming she'll understand if she does. If this is what they do when visiting, I can only imagine it's worse at home. Eventually, Uncle Justin. As long as the child excels, the parents can just rely on them, began to boldly claim. They're the worst kind of parents, only seeing their child as a potential source of money. The grandparents didn't refuse Uncle Justin's visits because they wanted to check on Victoria's condition. They even said, "We'll take Victoria in." However, Uncle Justin rejected the idea, saying, "I can't hand over a child who's going to be an important source of income," despite not showing any affection for Victoria. Still, every time Victoria visited, the grandparents gave her some pocket money or a gift for doing well in her studies. They wanted to make Victoria smile. But Uncle Justin and his wife would take those away, scolding Victoria for accepting anything from the grandparents. Eventually, the grandmother, feeling sorry for Victoria getting scolded, stopped giving her things or trying to make her happy. More accurately, she became unable to do so. Watching all this, I couldn't help but feel sorry for Victoria. And finally, I blurted out something. "Uncle Justin, it's sad for Victoria, always being forced to do things she doesn't enjoy." To me, Victoria, who was younger, was like a sister. Being older, I thought, I have to protect Victoria. And being a child, I believed, Uncle Justin and his wife don't realize Victoria dislikes what they're doing. I thought no parent would force their child to do something they hate. So, I truly meant well when I said it. But, my words enraged Uncle Justin. "What would a child born to a dropout know about our household?" He berated me with such anger that he looked ready to throw something. My mother quickly hugged me, and my grandparents rushed out to calm Uncle Justin. Even Miranda, Justin's wife, looked at me with disdain. I hadn't realized, my mother had always tried to avoid Uncle Justin, and that Uncle Justin had always looked down on my mother. Let me say it again, Uncle Justin is neither elite nor anything special. Just an average person who grew up in the countryside, went to a regular high school, attended a regular university, and couldn't keep a job despite having a child and marrying in haste, a man less than ordinary. Yet, He believes he's excellent and thinks everyone else is a fool. In Uncle Justin's mind, my mother was a shameful person who couldn't even graduate high school because she had a child. Enraged by my words, Uncle Justin unleashed a torrent of blame on my mother. "You are a disgrace to our family," he said over and over, blaming her for his breakup with a girlfriend because I couldn't date someone with an unreasonable sister like you. Uncle Justin blamed my mother for Aunt Sarah's distance, saying, "It's because of you, our shame, that Sarah doesn't come near this house. It's your fault." Aunt Sarah runs a lodge and hardly has the leisure to visit often. As for Uncle Justin's girlfriend, it was clear to anyone else that the issue was with his lack of popularity. My mother must have had her own struggles, giving birth to me. Despite Uncle Justin's irrational venting, my mother was affected by it and cried. I still think, if we hadn't cared about what Uncle Justin said, it might not have turned out this way. Then, about a year later, one day, suddenly, Uncle Justin arrived at our house with his family, carrying several suitcases. Just when I wondered what was happening, they said, "From today, we'll be living in this house." Both the grandparents and our family were utterly dismayed and speechless. It turns out Uncle Justin had quit his job again. He had finally run through his savings after too many job changes, so now he planned to live in our house. In essence, he intended to rely on my grandparents. The grandparents lamented, "How did our son end up like this?" They repeatedly told Uncle Justin to just get a job, but he wouldn't listen. Instead, "I've become mentally ill from working too much," he claimed. When asked for a doctor's note, he had none, implying it was self-diagnosed depression. After they had vacated their previous residence, while Uncle Justin and his wife were one matter, the thought of Victoria's suffering made the grandparents reluctantly allow Uncle Justin's family to stay in the house on a temporary basis. The grandparents had stated they would evict them immediately if the terms were not adhered to. That summer, the grandfather collapsed from heatstroke while working in the field and passed away. The sudden event left the grandmother utterly devastated, and her pre-existing Crohn's disease worsened from the stress. Perhaps due to her age, she gradually began to deteriorate physically, leading to frequent hospitalizations. Eventually, my grandmother also passed away. With the frequently scolding grandmother gone, our house was quickly overtaken by Uncle Justin and his family. My mother was inevitably forced to do all the housework because Uncle Justin and his wife did nothing. And for some reason, my mother ended up taking care of Victoria too. Well, it seemed Victoria was happier with my mother around than her actual parents, Uncle Justin and his wife. But that's not all. Eventually, neither Uncle Justin nor his wife worked, living off my grandparents' inheritance. My mother repeatedly pleaded, "I won't ask you to work anymore, just help around the house. I have to go to work." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Instead, Uncle Justin arrogantly retorted, "You know we don't want to work, yet you expect us to do household chores?" I was so angry at them for making my mother work that I complained. But I was told to shut up, kid, and sometimes, things were thrown at me. Amidst all this, my mother had been planning to move us away from this place by the time I started middle school. She was juggling jobs, desperately saving money. But gradually, my mother's health began to deteriorate. She seemed lethargic every day, going to work after taking nutritional supplements, and she started getting fevers. Despite pleading with Uncle Justin and his wife to please just help with the household chores, her requests were ignored. My mother was eating, yet she became increasingly thin. Finally, when I was in 5th grade, my mother passed away from overwork. Technically, it wasn't diagnosed as overwork. She was diagnosed with heart failure. But considering the circumstances and my mother's youth, it was clear to anyone that overwork was the cause. She had repeatedly asked Uncle Justin and his wife to help with the household, even if it was just a little. She suffered through countless fevers and pains. And I couldn't do anything. My feelings of resentment towards Uncle Justin and his wife were as strong as my guilt, thinking, it's all my fault. Could I have saved my mother if I were an adult? Was I just a burden because I was a child? If I hadn't been there, maybe my mother would still be alive. As I pondered these regrets, absent-mindedly attending my mother's funeral, Aunt Miranda. What should we do about Alice? Uncle Justin, squinting his eyes in annoyance, said, well, normally, since we live together, I guess we have to take her in. And then scratching his head continued, this is so bothersome. Aunt Miranda. No way! It's troublesome enough with our own child, let alone having more kids. Also explicitly rejected me. Why did Sabrina even have a child? To make matters worse, Sabrina's husband is also gone, leaving us with this nuisance. Really, it's because of having children without planning. And then to die young, how foolish. Kids born to dropouts probably have no future anyway. If only we could make her existence disappear. Should we just leave her in the mountains? Yeah, let's leave the dropout's child in the mountains. Decided. Uncle Justin and his wife were getting excited over this horrifying conversation. However, the look in their eyes told me this was no joke. What should I do? Could it be that I'll end up going to my mother's side because of Uncle Justin and his wife? I'm scared. As I felt my body tremble uncontrollably without my consent, Uncle Justin's hands reached out towards me. Wondering what they would do to me, I tensed up. Enough of this noise. We will take in Alice. Aunt Sarah slammed the table and declared. Caught off guard, Uncle Justin, his wife, and I were all startled. Aunt Sarah suddenly said she would take me in, but we've barely had any conversations before. Of course, we met at my grandparents' funerals and such. But as a child who barely knew her, I could only respond with nods and minimal interaction. Hey, even if you say you'll take her in, isn't your place nearly bankrupt? Do you even have the money to look after a child? Indeed, Aunt Sarah had taken over the lodge that her aunt, my grandmother's sister, used to run because there was no successor. However, its performance had been declining. The situation had worsened over the years, and recently, there were hardly any guests. It was on the brink of closure. This is no time for such talk. Aunt Sarah retorted angrily. But, being taken in by someone without the means to support me was a cause for concern. After all, she was not only my mother's sister but also Uncle Justin's. I wondered which of their traits she inherited. If she was like Uncle Justin, that would be frightening. But, it had to be better than being left in the mountains. Uncle Justin said, It's good we won't be committing a crime then. All right, you take her. And laughed as he handed me over to Aunt Sarah. Noticing how pale and frightened I was, Aunt Sarah said, I'm sorry, I know you're anxious right now, but I promise to make you happy. Holding my hand. However, I was too overwhelmed to feel the warmth of her grip. With all these uncertainties, I was taken in by Aunt Sarah's home after my mother's funeral and sorting out her belongings. 10 years have passed since then. To conclude, I am truly grateful to have been taken in by Aunt Sarah's home. Originally single, Aunt Sarah promised on the day. From now on, I'll live for you, Alice. She took me in. And she has kept her word, not marrying or having any romantic relationships. I had worried that I might become a nuisance if Aunt Sarah found a lover or husband, but such fears were unnecessary. In hindsight, Aunt Sarah might have realized I harbored such anxieties. The lodge was indeed in a dire state, with hardly any guests, and our living was modest. My mother, who inherited my grandparents' estate, used some of it for living expenses but left the rest to me. However, Aunt Sarah never used it for our living expenses. Instead, when I became a high school student, she said, "You decide how to use this money. It carries everyone's wishes, so think carefully about it," handing me a significant sum. It was clearly more than what my grandmother had left, which makes me think Aunt Sarah must have been saving up a little at a time, though she denied it. Aunt Sarah always hated Uncle Justin for being arrogant and looking down on his sisters. She didn't dislike my mother but was frustrated by her inability to stand up to Uncle Justin, using the lodge's management as an excuse to stay away from the family home. She felt the same about my grandparents, thinking it would have been better to forcefully remove someone like Uncle Justin. While the grandparents were indeed strict with Uncle Justin, Aunt Sarah didn't see it that way. Eventually, she came to think it's useless to say anything. My mother, Aunt Sarah, and my grandparents each must have been carrying their own thoughts and miscommunications. Maybe if I had spoken up more, Alice's life wouldn't have turned out this way. It seemed Aunt Sarah was regretting her actions in her own way. Now that I'm an adult, I understand that no one except Uncle Justin is to blame. Controlling someone who won't listen or lacks common sense is truly difficult. I realized family issues are deep-rooted. Perhaps feeling a sense of guilt, Aunt Sarah has always treated me very affectionately. Despite having little money, she would lavish me with home-cooked meals on my birthday, and when she could afford it, she took me shopping. When I was newly taken in, she would comfort me as I woke up crying from dreams of my mother every night. She was someone I could talk to about my worries about further education or the pains of social interactions. Aunt Sarah has become like a sister to me, a friend, a mentor in life, an irreplaceable and very dear existence. I used to always call her Aunt Sarah, but as I grew, I started calling her Sarah. Because we both have my mother's memory in us, Sarah is not my mother. But she's as important and close to me as my mother was, yet not quite an aunt either. Part of it is because saying aunt reminds me of Uncle Justin and his wife, whom I detest, but the days spent with Sarah have truly been enjoyable. Then one day, suddenly, a call came from Uncle Justin and his wife. "Let's ignore it," Sarah suggested, but the call was persistent, ringing over and over, disrupting her work. Sarah, with a look of annoyance, "I'll get it," resigned herself to answer. "No, it's okay, Sarah. I'll answer it." "Are you sure? It's from them, you know. Your ears might suffer. Are you really okay with it? You won't regret it?" "Oh, Sarah, always saying that." "Well, you're right, though." We laughed together as I picked up the phone. Then, "Finally, you picked up!" Uncle Justin's desperate voice shouted through the phone. "Is this a reservation call?" "Of course not." "Then, what do you want?" "That voice, you're not Sarah, are you? Could it be Alice?" "Does it matter?" Dealing with Uncle Justin was always a hassle, so I brushed him off nonchalantly, whether he realized it was me or not. "Why didn't you tell me?" He suddenly exploded over the phone. "Excuse me? Tell you what?" I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. "Your lodge, it's becoming a hit, isn't it?" "What?" I was taken aback by his sudden claim, but what Uncle Justin said wasn't wrong. In fact, for the past few years, the lodge had been booming. I had acquired a hunting license at a young age. And then, I advertised this lodge as a place where you could enjoy game cuisine. It's fully booked, limiting guests to 3 groups per day. Since game cuisine is relatively pricey, it was a bold marketing strategy. But this exclusivity became popular, and the lodge, once on the brink of closure, is now in demand. Not only among domestic game enthusiasts, but also among foreign tourists. After being featured on television, even regulars struggle to make reservations. I became known as the beautiful huntress. Am I really that beautiful? Well, television tends to add beautiful to anything. It's probably because there are few young girls in the hunting industry, but I don't mind the label. Well, yes, it is popular, but do I need to inform you? Of course. Do you know what I've been through? I'm not interested, so I don't know. I truly wasn't interested. I wanted to end the call due to my busy schedule. However, Uncle Justin, regardless of my circumstances, continued to talk. Haven't you seen the news? That house we used to live in was arsoned. I didn't need to watch the news. The police had informed us, and we were well aware of the situation. In fact, it was barely mentioned by the local news. It's a mystery why Uncle Justin thought we, the former residents, wouldn't know about it. Becoming an adult, I realized anew that Uncle Justin is indeed a fool. Oh really? I'm currently broke and homeless. Victoria and Miranda left me too. Won't you even try to help me in my struggles? Absolutely not. You cold-hearted woman. Just like a dropout. You're the one who spread rumors about me on the internet. What? As I puzzled over Uncle Justin's unreasonable words, the guests had gone to bed, and Sarah, who had finished her work. What's going on? Whispered. Trying not to let Uncle Justin hear, I covered the phone and whispered. Something about being bad-mouthed on the internet or something. Oh. That thing. Sarah said. Put it on speaker, but keep the volume low so the guests can't hear. Clapping her hands lightly. As instructed, I switched the phone to speaker. Uncle Justin, unaware of this. It's because you talked about your upbringing on TV that my house was set on fire. Said over the phone. No, all I talked about on TV were the delights of game meat and hunting. What is he even talking about? You're so noisy. As always, all you can do is complain. Sarah scoffed. Suddenly, Uncle Justin. You! Sarah? Raised his voice. Let me stay at your place too. Your brother is in trouble. You'll help, right? Huh? Are you stupid? If I had thought you as my brother, I would have helped you right when I found out the house was being nicely toasted. Nicely toasted? I almost laughed at Sarah's unique phrasing but managed to hold it in. You've always been so unkind. Don't you have the kindness to support your family? If it's family, yes. But you're not family, just baggage. You. Listen, I don't have a wife or kids. You do realize that if something happens to me in the future, you're the only one who can take care of me? The law will help me. You have a duty to take care of me. That's why you don't have a wife or kids. As we were making noise. What's going on? Someone asked from behind. Oh, Vicky. Hey, Vicky. Uncle Justin was momentarily at a loss for words at our exchange. Was that voice? Victoria? Oops, he noticed. Sarah answered Uncle Justin's question calmly. Victoria and I couldn't help but laugh. What do you mean? Why is Victoria, who disappeared, here? Disappeared? That's rich, coming from someone who didn't even look. Victoria has been with us since she was 16. What? I heard Miranda contacted you first, and she said Victoria wasn't there. Still haven't caught on? What? Even over the phone, I could hear Uncle Justin's puzzled, foolish tone. Victoria and I looked at each other and stifled our laughter. How should I say this? Miranda, your wife was involved. What? Miranda wanted a divorce from you. But she didn't want to take Victoria either, so she was wondering what to do. Really, such a selfish woman. Sarah explained the situation to Uncle Justin. Yes, Aunt Miranda had decided to leave Uncle Justin and go back to her ex-boyfriend, the man she had an affair with. It's not that Victoria was particularly beloved, but leaving her daughter with an unkind husband seemed to be too much for her half-hearted conscience. For some reason, she told Sarah, "I'm giving Victoria to you." Normally, this would be a proposition to outright reject, but knowing that Victoria had been living a pitiable life, Sarah and I, while yelling at Miranda, accepted this arrangement. Not for Miranda's sake, but for Victoria's. Thus, Victoria was officially taken in by Sarah under the guise of having disappeared, and Aunt Miranda took the opportunity to flee from Uncle Justin. Upon learning everything, "So I was deceived by all the women." Uncle Justin was speechless. Deceived? Don't put it so badly. It's just that you were too foolish to notice. Normally, Uncle Justin would have retorted to Sarah's words, but this time, he seemed too disheartened to even muster the energy, remaining silent instead. It appeared he was actually saddened by Sarah's remarks. "I was the only one who knew nothing." "Yes, that's right." Uncle Justin's voice grew increasingly lifeless in response to Sarah's unyielding clarity. "Since when? Why?" "Since Victoria was 16. It's simple. Your wife and child didn't come back because you're not attractive to them. That's all there is to it." "And you talked about me on TV to disgrace me? Saying I yelled at Alice's mother or dumped house chores on her. That's about the online flame war, right?" "Sorry, but Alice isn't the kind of young person knows how to use a computer. She's more comfortable with a hunting rifle than a mouse." "Then, who was it? Victoria?" "Ugh, you're slow. It wasn't the kids. There's one more person." "You? Are you dumb? Why would I bother with you now?" As Sarah's remarks grew sharper. Sarah, just in case any guests heard, that would be troublesome." Victoria and I instinctively tried to stop her. Realizing her slip, Sarah covered her mouth. Thinking back, it's somewhat amusing that all of us were concerned about guests overhearing but didn't mind being harsh to Uncle Justin. "Who else is there? Uncle Justin seemed to have realized something. "Are you finally with us?" With a malicious smile, I asked. "Miranda." "Yes, the Miranda who ran away from you. When our lodge got popular, she thought talking to magazines about the kids' upbringing could earn her some money. Not a significant amount, since she's no celebrity." "Are you sure?" "She told me herself. She exposed a lot but said not to hold a grudge, 'cause it's a good thing for us too. Always the worst, isn't she? All this because of her." Uncle Justin was furious. Apparently, the arson of his house and the online flame war were connected. "Evil should be punished," said some odd student who targeted him for a prank, setting his place on fire. Every time Uncle Justin raged about it. "It's quite a blaze everywhere." Sarah laughed as if it was someone else's problem. "So, we have no intention of supporting you. Live on your own." "You don't have to support me. If Victoria is here, she can take care of me. I don't need you anymore." Vicky. What do you say?" Sarah turned the conversation to Victoria, who laughed and said, "Shut up, you worst dad ever. Relying on your child to live is pathetic. If you really want, I can make you bedridden for life and then I'll take care of you." Never before had I seen Victoria, usually so mild-mannered, explode in such filthy language. Her smiling yet furious response even made Sarah and me tremble a bit. It was so intimidating that for a while, we couldn't interact with Victoria as freely as before. Perhaps the terror reached him through the phone because, surprisingly, Uncle Justin said nothing more and hung up. Maybe he thought better than to cling to Victoria any further. After that, Uncle Justin ceased to involve himself with us. I later read in an online article that Uncle Justin had tried to sue Miranda for defamation. But since it was a family matter with little to no evidence, the lawsuit didn't proceed. The fuss stirred various speculations online, with some wondering if Uncle Justin had been too controlling over Miranda or if, in fact, Miranda had also been suffering. Rumors started swirling around, casting Uncle Justin as the villain of the piece, and criticisms of Uncle Justin quickly followed. He lost his house, spent his grandmother's inheritance long ago, and though he once made money through investments, that too ended in failure. What became of Uncle Justin afterwards is a mystery. One day, someone claiming to be an acquaintance of Uncle Justin's got in touch and said, "I haven't seen him since he went off to the Middle East with some get-rich-quick scheme. Do you know anything?" Of course, there was no way for us to know Uncle Justin's whereabouts. I wonder how he's doing. Hopefully, he's still in one piece. Miranda tried to expose us for the money too. Online users debated, "Isn't this woman just as bad?" and the backlash spread to Miranda as well. Like Uncle Justin, she had her house identified, and it seems she was repeatedly harassed with pranks. Naturally, things didn't work out with her affair partner, and she's still struggling with ongoing harassment, managing to live on her own somehow. She never liked working, so her life must be pretty rough. It's unclear if she's even managing to eat properly. Whether she's still alive, it's a frightening thought. We continue to run the lodge together, and both Victoria and I have gotten married. We suggested Sarah should marry too, but "I've already got kids and dating seems like too much hassle," she said. Well, it's true that Sarah has a very straightforward personality, so it's hard, no offense, to picture her living with a man. She seems genuinely happy with her life now, carefully attending to our guests every day. Our husbands have each gotten involved in the lodge's operations, making things even livelier. Now that we've managed to turn it into a family-run business, our revenue has stabilized. Our lodge remains fully booked by reservation only, but its popularity hasn't waned, and we have many repeat guests. It's heartwarming when guests who visited in their youth return with their own children. Every day brings wonderful new encounters. Running the lodge is so fulfilling, we're starting to consider hiring more staff. Victoria and I are also saying, "Now that work has settled down, it might be the right time for both of us to think about having kids." It would be lovely if our children could work here someday. Dreaming of such a bright future, I continue to spend my days surrounded by a wonderful family and cherished guests, living happily ever after. I'm selling this house because I'm moving in with my girlfriend. Dad, who betrayed Mom, further hurt her. This house was in Dad's name, but Mom had contributed a significant amount of money to build it, and she loved this house. Yet, Dad decided to claim everything for himself without considering Mom's feelings. Now, 12 years after my parents' divorce, I've come to understand things I couldn't back then and decided to take revenge on Dad. I couldn't forgive Dad for living comfortably after hurting Mom, who had struggled to raise me. "Does your company condone affairs?" That's what I told them during my interview at Dad's company. My name is Chloe. I'm a 21-year-old senior in college, currently job hunting. When I was in 4th grade, my parents divorced, and we moved to Mom's parents' house, which meant changing schools and my entire environment, which led to some mental instability. I wasn't very sociable, so making friends was hard. Being a child of divorce, I was often left out, and I didn't have the courage to initiate conversations. For the 2 years from the transfer until graduating elementary school, I had no close friends and felt isolated, often getting sad remembering friends from my previous school. Moreover, Mom was working all day, so our time together decreased, and I spent more time with my grandparents. My grandparents were caring, but having always been with my parents, I found it hard to open up to them. However, things settled down when I started middle school. There were many students from different elementary schools, so I finally met people who didn't prejudge me for my parents' divorce. I made friends and slowly started to become happier, leaving behind my constant sadness. Determined not to burden Mom, I focused more on my studies. I got a scholarship that covered tuition for college, leading to a busy life filled with studies and part-time work. I wanted to make Mom's life peaceful and happy, so even in my busy life, I felt fulfilled. I've become more sociable than before, but the trauma from my past still lingers. Until 4th grade, when my parents divorced, I lived a normal life with both Mom and Dad. I was a shy child, so even though I had friends, I mostly spent weekends with my family. I think I was a child who loved my parents dearly. We used to have family meals together every morning and evening, and after dinner, we'd spend time together as a family. But then Dad started coming home late from work, and there were nights he wouldn't return before I went to bed. Dad was already in a managerial position then, and Mom told me he couldn't come home because of the responsibilities and overtime. Even though I felt lonely, I understood that it was Dad's job that provided for our current lifestyle. So I hoped Dad would be able to finish work earlier. This routine continued until one night, I woke up and heard my parents arguing. This was something that had never happened before, and curiosity overcame my anxiety. I cautiously approached to see what was happening. Dad, angry and carrying his belongings, stormed out of the living room. "Enough! I'd rather be with my girlfriend than you. We're getting a divorce." Mom started crying at his words, but Dad ignored her and headed for the front door. "Dad!" Knowing what divorce meant, I feared I'd never see Dad again, so I ran after him and clung to him, hoping the kind Dad who used to play with me would stop. "Get out of my way!" But Dad, who had never been rough with me before, glanced at me coldly and shook me off without hesitation. Thrown harshly, I rolled down the hallway, bruising myself. I burst into tears from the shock of Dad's anger and being pushed away. And the pain made the reality even harder to bear. Confused about why Dad suddenly became cold towards me, I couldn't stop crying. Mom hugged me while I cried, but Dad left the house without looking back, even though I was crying. Seeing Dad leave like that, I felt abandoned and cried even harder. This incident made me afraid to trust anyone but Mom for a while, and I think it made me even more introverted. Dad never returned after that, and we continued living in the house, but a few days later, he came back. I briefly hoped we could be a family again, but that hope was quickly shattered. "I'm selling this house because I'm moving in with my girlfriend. Get out." Dad showed Mom some documents. I remember this house being built when I was in 1st grade. Mom was delighted to have our own home. I was sure they had built it together. So Mom protested Dad selling the house on his own, but since it was in his name, she had to give up. Thus, Mom and I were forced to move to her parents' house. As a child, I was not privy to the dealings between Mom and Dad that followed. However, I often wondered why Mom worked so hard, even though she probably should be receiving compensation and child support. I assumed part of her effort was for my sake, but I thought we would have more financial leeway if Dad had been paying child support. Curious, I asked my grandparents about it during high school. I thought Mom wouldn't want to tell me, and it must have been a painful topic for her too, so I couldn't ask her. According to my grandparents, it seemed Dad had fled without paying any alimony or child support. Mom had contacted him numerous times about the missing payments, but after he became unreachable, she decided to prioritize our future and let it go. As I suspected, their divorce was due to Dad's infidelity, confirming that he had betrayed our family. Hearing this from my grandparents, I understood why Mom worked so hard and felt a surge of anger towards Dad. Mom, it seemed, had given up pursuing Dad further and hadn't even tried to find his address to urge him to pay for alimony or child support. Though I was angry with Dad, who didn't seem to have much remorse, my desire to ease Mom's burdens quickly overshadowed it. I wanted to make sure Mom, who always prioritizes me over herself and is busy from morning till night, could have some time to relax. I've always thought that Mom should take more care of herself. Using my anger towards Dad as motivation, I doubled down on my studies, aiming to land a good job to assist Mom. The thought of Dad living carefree was frustrating, but I tried not to dwell on it, focusing instead on our current life, just like Mom. As a university student beginning to think about job hunting, I was organizing our storage to create a better resume. I hoped to recall past experiences for my self-promotion. While sorting through storage, I found letters from friends before I transferred schools in elementary, immersing myself in memories. Then, I came across an unfamiliar box. Curious, I opened it and found it contained documents from an investigation into Dad's infidelity. I was shocked to find these hidden away. Though I had tried to stop thinking about Dad, I still wanted to know what had happened between my parents. Compelled, I began to read the documents. As I read the story in more detail than what I heard from my grandparents, my desire for revenge against Dad grew. My grandparents probably had chosen their words carefully or didn't know the full extent. Reading further, I realized Dad had done worse things than I had imagined. He had been unfaithful for longer than I thought, and it seemed he hadn't even tried to hide his late nights from Mom. His affair was with a woman 6 years his junior, who had had a difficult life herself. After a car accident left her mom dead, she had been working since she was a student because her dad had after effects. Despite having a more challenging life than mine, how could she not feel remorse for destroying a family? In the evidence photos of the affair, the woman walking arm in arm with Dad was visibly pregnant. I couldn't help feeling disgusted seeing the two of them looking so content together. To anyone unaware, they would seem like a happy couple. Yet in reality, they were two people who didn't care about the misery they brought upon Mom and me. I had tried not to dwell on my anger towards Dad, but seeing this, it was impossible. I felt an overwhelming urge to make them suffer, but I managed to hold back. I thought about how Mom would be saddened if anything happened to me and about the potential future of their child, who must be around middle school age by now, 12 years after the divorce. I couldn't forgive Dad and his mistress, but acting on my emotions would only harm their child, causing them the same pain I endured. I didn't want to stoop to Dad's level, and that thought stopped me. However, the anger was too strong to ignore. A few days later, on a weekend, I decided to visit the house mentioned in the investigation report. I doubted they would still be there after all this time, but I needed to check. Upon arrival, I found the house no longer existed, which left me with mixed feelings of disappointment and relief. I had wanted to confront Dad about his affair and ask about Mom, but the thought of actually meeting him was nerve-wracking. As I was walking away, convinced I would never meet him and that I should forget him, I noticed a nameplate with Dad's name. I stopped, startled. Trying to convince myself it was probably someone else, curiosity led me to observe the house more closely. It was a spacious family home with a play area for children. Being a weekend, I could faintly hear children's voices. If Dad had remarried his mistress after the divorce, it wouldn't be strange if they had a family. The thought was suffocating, and as I watched the front door open and children come out, I moved to a spot farther away to continue observing. Then, the parents followed, and despite looking older than in the photos, I recognized them as Dad and his mistress. Dad had built a happy family with his mistress without paying us any compensation or child support. While Mom struggled, Dad lived comfortably. Filled with anger, I clenched my fists. After watching them leave happily as a family, I headed straight to a detective agency and requested an investigation into Dad's family. I used all my savings and part-time job earnings for this. When I later received the investigation results, it confirmed that Dad had been living well after the divorce, with 3 children. While Mom and I struggled, Dad lived comfortably without facing any consequences for his affair, a fact that left me bitter. I realized I harbored not just anger but also resentment towards Dad and his mistress, who lived carefree after abandoning Mom and me. I wanted them to experience the same pain and hardship that Mom and I went through. However, recognizing that even though they were the worst, their children were innocent, I wanted to speak with them at least once, more for my peace of mind than for revenge. So, calming myself for a composed conversation, I decided to visit after school. Dad would be at work and the kids at school, leaving his housewife mistress, Abigail, at home. What was she thinking, having an affair with a married man and now living happily with him? With questions and things I wanted to say, I went to their house on a day school ended in the morning and rang the doorbell. As expected, Abigail answered. "Yes, how can I help you?" Her normal response irritated me, and I blurted out, "How can you live normally after stealing Dad from Mom and me and breaking up our family?" It seemed I wasn't as calm as I thought, speaking sharply without realizing. What are you talking about?" She seemed quite dubious, possibly on guard because of the sudden question. Perhaps for her, an affair was something that could be easily forgotten. This thought made my chest tighten. Amazed at how she could pretend not to know, I explained everything about my relationship with Dad and what happened 12 years ago. I broke into tears recalling the past, but once I finished, I looked at her for a reaction. The truth I learned then solidified my resolve for revenge. Some time later, I went for a job interview. With good grades and active involvement in various activities, I had many strong points. I usually passed the document screening without issues, and this time, as I faced the interviewers, it seemed like I had already left a favorable impression again. 3 interviewers questioned me while reviewing my documents. Thanks to my preparation, I answered smoothly, and the interviewer's cheerful expression and impressed attitude made me feel quite confident. At the end, when they said I could ask any questions I had, I decided to ask something I had been wanting to know. Does your company condone affairs? What actions would be taken if an affair occurs? My question surprised the interviewers, leaving them momentarily speechless. After a pause, they said they hadn't encountered such a situation but would probably impose some penalty. And when asked why I was inquiring about this, I explained the whole situation. My father, who abandoned my mother through infidelity, works here and is currently having an affair within the company. One interviewer, visibly upset, slammed the table and stood up angrily. Are you joking? How dare you come here and lie in such a manner? This is outrageous. I immediately retorted. Please don't shout just because I hit a nerve, Dad. I had actually known that Dad worked in this company and that he was involved in interviews as personnel. Therefore, I purposely attended this interview to expose Dad's actions. There were many interviewees, and it wasn't certain Dad would be the interviewer, but I thought damaging his reputation would be enough. His aggressive response to my presence added credibility to my story, and I felt a sense of satisfaction. Initially, Dad didn't seem to recognize me, but he became unsettled after reading my documents. He didn't remember my face, but my name and educational background must have made him realize I was the daughter of his ex-wife. He seemed relieved when I showed no reaction to seeing him, thinking I hadn't recognized him. I calmly retorted to Dad's anger. It's a fact that you cheated on Mom and are now in an affair with a younger woman in this company, right? I'm just stating the truth. The investigation I had commissioned revealed not only about Dad's post-divorce family but also his infidelity. Apparently, Dad was quite the philanderer, having 3 kids and still fooling around. He was having an affair with a younger female colleague, and there were photos of them looking happy together, leaving no room for denial. Is this some kind of harassment? Do you think you can get away with this? Dad accused me of lying and tried to blame me. He had been successful in hiding his actions so far and was desperate not to be punished. Smirking, I continued. It's the truth, isn't it? I wanted to know what the company thinks about having such a person in a responsible position. Dad wanted to make me look bad, but that wasn't going to happen. The other two interviewers, having witnessed our exchange, looked displeased. I showed them the final piece of evidence. By the way, this is the report on Dad's infidelity. I trust you will review it and take appropriate action. Dad tried to dismiss what I said in a panic, but I handed the investigation report to the other interviewers, asking them to address the affair. Dad tried to grab me, but I dodged and delivered my final blow. Abigail knows about this and is coming to the office today. I had told Abigail about Dad's affair, and in her anger, she had planned to confront him publicly. So before leaving the interview room, I declared to Dad that he had no escape.
You told her? When did you even meet her?
Dad, shocked and not expecting I knew Abigail, froze. Ignoring him, I left the room. Dad's yelling could still be heard after I closed the door, drawing stares from other interviewees. Normally, the atmosphere would feel uncomfortable, but knowing that I had derailed Dad's smooth life brought me a sense of relief. Originally, I came to this company solely for revenge against Dad, so failing the interview was not a concern. Having finished my task, I was walking down the hallway when I heard footsteps running up from behind. Turning around, I saw Dad, his face red with anger, charging at me to throw a punch. Surprised, I managed to dodge and avoided injury, but I stumbled and fell. Looking down at me, Dad shouted angrily, "What have you done? If it weren't for you." As Dad tried to hit me again, I braced myself, unable to evade, and covered my head with my arms, preparing for the impact. However, before he could strike, Dad froze. "What are you doing to Chloe? And what's this about an affair? You told me you were single, but you've been deceiving me." Abigail had arrived, startling Dad. She swung her bag at Dad, who was ready to strike me, hitting and shielding me from him.
"Abigail, it's not what you think."
Dad panicked at Abigail's arrival, but as Abigail, angered and feeling deceived, started to confront him, they began to argue. Abigail, while shouting in anger, hit Dad with her bag, causing a major commotion. It turned out that when I confronted Abigail about the affair, she was unaware that Dad was married.
"I'm sorry, even if I didn't know. You must have suffered a lot. I will definitely make it up to you. I'm truly sorry."
She apologized tearfully. Further conversation revealed that she met Dad through work, and he had been helping her as a struggling motherless child. Dad had hidden his marital status, and they eventually started dating. Abigail had been working right after graduating high school in order to live with her father, who suffered from the after effects of an accident, which also took away her mother. It was natural to develop feelings for Dad, who had helped her. I had thought the mistress would be a terrible person, but Abigail was another victim of Dad. Apparently, Mom had never asked Abigail for compensation or even contacted her, and until now, Abigail was unaware of Dad's misdeeds. I wondered why Mom hadn't pursued compensation from Abigail, but then remembered she was pregnant at the time. Perhaps Mom didn't want to burden a pregnant woman, even if she was the mistress. Thinking this as I watched Abigail tearfully apologize, I realized she wasn't the villain I had thought her to be. She didn't look like she was trying to deceive me. So, I told her about Dad's current affair with a coworker. The investigation report included evidence of Dad's ongoing infidelity. I thought that Abigail, being a victim herself, deserved to know about Dad's current actions. When I showed her the documents, she became furiously angry at Dad.
"He lied about being single, married me, and now this? What kind of person is he? I will never forgive him."
Her anger towards Dad, the betrayer, ran deep, and together we decided to take revenge on him. Originally, I had applied to Dad's company and was already scheduled for a second-round interview. So, on the day of the interview, Abigail and I had planned to go to the company and publicly denounce Dad. The two caused quite a scene in the company hallway, with other male employees restraining Dad and security arriving. I took Abigail's hand and led her out of the company after the commotion. Many people had gathered around due to the noise. Among them, I spotted the woman from the investigation photos, hiding in the shadows with a petrified look on her face. My revenge was complete by exposing Dad's misdeeds, which had been hidden until now. Subsequently, Dad, who was on the verge of becoming a department head, got demoted to a regular employee due to the affair. Since most of the situation became known during the chaos in the hallway, he seems to be working with a sense of humility. He used to have a reputation as a family-oriented and capable supervisor, but when Dad's bad deeds became known within the company, he was branded the worst man and was treated coldly. The woman Dad had an affair with apparently quietly resigned from the company. Additionally, Abigail demanded compensation and child support from Dad and informed him of her intention to divorce. With the company's cooperation, Dad couldn't escape paying. During the divorce mediation, Abigail discovered that Dad had not paid any compensation or child support to my mom, and also learned of his gambling habits in addition to spending money for his lover. Though he claimed it was occasional, he had been deceitfully spending family savings on gambling. Abigail, further enraged by these revelations, successfully demanded a higher amount of compensation and child support from Dad. Dad tried to deceive until the very end and was very reluctant about the divorce and compensation, so the mediation didn't end quickly. But Abigail persistently questioned Dad, and the commotion became known even to those outside the company who were unaware of the chaos at the office. Consequently, acquaintances of Dad who were unaware of the situation gradually distanced themselves from him. Dad became completely isolated as a result. After the divorce, Abigail offered me a part of the compensation as an apology.
This might not be enough to make amends, but I hope you'll accept it as an apology for the trouble I've caused.
However, since I had kept my revenge against Dad a secret from Mom, I declined the money.
Abigail, you're also a victim of Dad, and the children need the money more. Please keep it for them.
Mom seemed to have put her past with Dad behind her, so I had no intention of bringing it up again. I thought that Mom, who must have suffered a lot, wouldn't want to remember it anymore, even after Dad received his comeuppance. I didn't harbor any resentment towards Abigail or her children, who were also victims of Dad. Instead, I frequently visited them, concerned about their well-being as a single-parent family. The children and I grew close. And I hope they grow up righteously, unlike Dad. Getting to know Abigail better, I realized she was naturally calm and not the type to raise her voice. The stark contrast to the woman who had fiercely confronted Dad in the company made me reconsider Mom's strength during the divorce. Later, I successfully got a job at my preferred company and shared the news with Mom, who was overjoyed at my growth. Seeing her happiness made me feel content. And without the shadow of Dad, I truly relished the moment. Determined to reduce Mom's burden, I geared up for my new job. I may never forgive Dad for his actions, but he's already received his just desserts. Now, I want to live happily, not worrying about Dad anymore.
Laura here. Annabelle. Melissa. If you're there, please answer.
I banged on the door loudly, but there was no response at all. Just as I was about to leave, thinking they might have gone out, I heard the sound of a key turning. When the door opened, there stood my granddaughter Melissa. She looked anxious, but her face lit up when she saw me.
"Granny!"
she exclaimed briefly and hugged me tightly. I picked up Melissa and went inside. The room was eerily quiet, and Annabelle was nowhere to be seen.
"Melissa, did Annabelle go out somewhere?"
Melissa just nodded in response to my question. As we moved further into the house and reached the living room, I noticed half-eaten snacks on the table. I put Melissa down and asked her again.
"It's lunchtime, but you were eating snacks?"
"Yeah. When Dad's not here, Santa Claus comes and brings me snacks."
"Santa Claus? He comes on days when Dad's not here and brings lots of stuff. Mom looks so happy about it. But it's a secret from Dad. Because it would bother Santa Claus."
Hearing this, I became certain of something. Annabelle's flashy outfit the other day was for meeting this Santa Claus. I immediately started to search the house for evidence. I am Laura. I work at a cafe near my home. I lost my husband about 20 years ago, and since then, I have been raising my son Nicholas on my own. Since my husband's passing, the regulars at the cafe have been looking out for me in various ways. With their support, Nicholas grew up well and became independent as a working adult. I shared this joy with all the regulars. A few years after Nicholas started working, he married a woman named Stephanie, and they had my granddaughter, Melissa. Lately, my greatest joy has been seeing Melissa. She seems to have taken a liking to me, which makes me incredibly happy. My hobby is knitting, and I make sweaters and hats, gifting them to her whenever I can. Melissa, I knitted a sweater for you. Seeing the sweater I made, Stephanie also smiled warmly. Thank you as always. Melissa, make sure you thank her properly. Thank you. She held the sweater I gave her dearly, humming a tune as she took it to her room. Watching her back, Stephanie and I talked about Melissa's future. Everything was supposed to be fulfilling. But misfortune strikes suddenly. Stephanie fell seriously ill. I took care of Melissa instead, praying fervently every day for Stephanie's recovery. Nicholas, too, was busy caring for Stephanie and comforting Melissa whenever he could. We believed Stephanie would recover. However, after years of fighting the illness, Stephanie passed away. But there was no time to grieve. We still had young Melissa. With Nicholas busy at work, I started to go to his house to take care of her. Seeing Stephanie's resemblance in my granddaughter's face, I vowed to do everything to make Melissa happy. A few years passed by. I was at Nicholas's house, cooking dinner for Melissa as usual. Nicholas returned from work with a serious look on his face.
Mom, I need to talk to you, just the two of us.
He took Melissa to her room and returned alone after a while. I wondered what it was about. A bit anxious, I opened my mouth.
So, what's up?
Nicholas looked embarrassed.
Well, actually, I'm thinking of remarrying.
What? I blurted out loudly. Then covered my mouth, worrying Melissa might hear. Nicholas continued seriously.
Sorry, I know it's shocking. I didn't intend to at first. But thinking of the future, I worry about Melissa being lonely.
Indeed, Nicholas had a point. I'm taking care of her now, but there's no guarantee I can continue to do so. Melissa is still young, she might accept a new mother.
I understand. I'll support your decision. So, what's she like, the woman you're seeing?
Relieved, Nicholas smiled for the first time.
She's a junior at my company. She's been into me since she joined. She's really cheerful, I think Melissa will like her.
That's good to hear.
Actually, I'd like you to meet her before the wedding, if that's okay.
Of course. So the conversation progressed, and a few days later, I was set to meet Nicholas's fiancée. Her name is Annabelle, and just like Nicholas said, she was very cheerful. Throughout our conversation, her constant smile made me genuinely like her. When I first saw him at the company, I knew I liked him. I heard he lost his previous wife, but I didn't care and went for it. I aggressively pursued him. Anyway, she talked a lot. With her youthful appearance, she looked much younger than her age. I was worried about how Melissa would feel about Annabelle, but Melissa seemed to warm up to her quickly. Seeing Melissa so attached to Annabelle, I felt reassured that she would be all right.
Annabelle, please take good care of them. I'm here to help if you need anything.
I bowed as politely as I could, and Annabelle gave a thumbs up. Okay. Leave it to me. Afterward, Nicholas and Annabelle got married and started their new life. I wholeheartedly blessed their future and returned to my regular life. Working at the cafe, joking with the regulars, and knitting while watching TV at home. It was fulfilling, but I felt a bit lonely compared to the busyness of the past. At such times, I prayed in my heart to Stephanie. What would she say if she were alive? I thought about such things as I continued with my knitting. Several more years passed since their remarriage. One day, I went to give Melissa a sweater I had knitted, heading to the condominium where Nicholas and his family lived. Nicholas seemed busy with work lately, often away on business trips. With him not home often, I worried Annabelle might be overburdened with childcare. While delivering the sweater, I hoped to help Annabelle as well. Thinking about what to talk about with her, I headed to Nicholas's condominium.
What floor was it again?
Arriving at the condominium, I muttered to myself, standing in front of the elevator. Luckily, the elevator was just coming down. 3rd floor, 2nd floor, as the lights blinked, and a sound indicated its arrival at the 1st floor. In contrast to the slowly opening doors, a woman hurried out. I glanced at her and was surprised to see that the woman was Annabelle.
Oh! Annabelle!
Startled by my voice, Annabelle let out a gasp and hopped a little.
Laura? You startled me! What are you doing here?
Sorry about that. I knitted a sweater for Melissa and thought I'd bring it over. Hearing this, Annabelle suddenly seemed unsettled. Her gaze wandered around, restlessly. I noticed that Annabelle was dressed very elegantly. Her outfit and makeup were perfect.
Are you heading out? Bad timing on my part.
Yes, I have a meeting with mom friends. So, Avoiding eye contact and fidgeting with the hand not holding her bag, Annabelle spoke. Annabelle seemed in a hurry. Regretting not contacting her in advance, I suggested. Don't worry about me, go ahead. Melissa is in her room, right? If I stay with her, you can relax and enjoy your time more. And so, I offered.
Just wait a moment. I can't impose that on you, Laura.
Don't worry about it. You probably need a break too. I'm just an old lady with too much time on her hands. However, she stubbornly refused my offer, and I felt something was off. Sure, I might have been overstepping. But was there a need for her to be so frantic?
The truth is, my apartment's a mess. I'm embarrassed for you to see it. That's why I don't want you to come in.
It's fine, really. I can help clean up. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, Annabelle snatched the bag with the sweater from my hand. I really can't have you here.
I'll make sure Melissa gets the sweater.
Please go home now.
I'll contact you later.
Then she pressed the elevator button. Even as Annabelle stepped in and the doors began to close, she kept a wary eye on me, making sure I wasn't following. As the doors closed slowly, I waved goodbye. Only silence remained. But my mind was anything but quiet. The season was about to turn to autumn, yet her attire was quite revealing. I also noticed a strong scent of perfume. I've met with mom friends myself, but never dressed so provocatively. Maybe times have changed, but Annabelle's attire seemed too intent on attracting the opposite sex. Moreover, the once bright smiling Annabelle didn't smile at all. Instead, she had a glaring look that concerned me. I wanted to chase after her, go to the apartment, and clear my doubts. But Melissa was there too. Not wanting to cause a commotion, I decided not to. I watched the elevator light ascend with a feeling of unease. With worries in my heart, I left the condominium quickly. That night, while knitting and watching TV, I suddenly got a call from Annabelle. I stopped my work and answered the phone.
Hello.
Hello.
Granny.
Melissa's innocent voice came through. Her voice instantly made me smile. Melissa. It's been a while. Have you been well?
Yeah. And thanks for the sweater. I'll treasure it.
Her words brought relief. Annabelle had indeed given it to her.
That's all right, dear. If you ever need another, I'm always here to knit one for you. Really? That's so nice. Granny, you're like Santa Claus too.
The phrase "Granny, you're like Santa Claus too" oddly struck me. As if there was someone else giving gifts besides me. Yes, indeed. You're such a good girl, Santa Claus must visit you a lot. I subtly tried to confirm the meaning of her words.
Melissa. Don't say unnecessary things.
I faintly heard Annabelle's angry voice from the background. Unaware that I could hear her, Annabelle continued scolding in a stern tone.
You've already said thank you, right? Hang up now. Yes, okay. Sorry, Granny. I have to go now.
Melissa's voice was trembling. More than being upset about being scolded, she seemed frightened by Annabelle's voice.
Understood. Call me again later.
With that, I ended the call and picked up my crochet hook again. The interaction between the two felt oddly strained for a mother and child. Due to a vague unease, I found it hard to continue knitting. Annabelle's flashy attire from the afternoon and Melissa's fearful voice from earlier. Could something troubling be happening? I knew I had to do something, but wasn't sure what. I sat motionless for a while, pondering my next move.
That's it. Nicholas. I should talk to Nicholas.
With his image in mind, I immediately grabbed my mobile phone and called Nicholas. He was on a business trip out of state, but it should be after work hours.
Please, pick up.
Luckily, Nicholas answered the phone right away.
Hello. What's up, Mom? It's unusual for you to call at this time.
I could hear a hint of tiredness in his voice. But I had no time to worry about that.
Hello, Nicholas. Are you okay? I need to talk to you about something. I'm fine, but what's wrong? Did something happen?
Sensing urgency in my voice, Nicholas's tone became serious. I told him about visiting the condominium with the sweater, encountering Annabelle in the elevator hall, and then about Melissa earlier. Nicholas listened quietly as I spoke. After I finished, he replied, I understand the situation. Indeed, it does sound concerning. He let out a deep sigh.
That's what I thought. I can't stop thinking about it.
While I was frantic, Nicholas seemed surprisingly calm.
What should we do? What if something happens to Melissa? Just wait a moment, Mom. Panicking won't help. I think Annabelle is just stressed because I've been busy. We shouldn't make a fuss about it.
Calmed by Nicholas's advice, I regained some composure.
You're right. I'm sorry for jumping the gun. That's okay. But we can't just leave it at that. I'll talk to my company and try to cut my business trip short. We can go to the house together when I'm back.
Indeed, it's better to act together rather than rushing in alone. I agreed with Nicholas's suggestion.
Understood. Let me know when you've decided on a plan. Yeah. But keep this a secret from Annabelle, okay? Talk to you later.
After hanging up, I let out a deep sigh. Nothing was resolved yet, and the unease hadn't disappeared. But hearing Nicholas's calm voice had indeed eased my mind a bit.
Nicholas has really grown up. I need to stay strong too.
Reminding myself of this, I waited for Nicholas's call with a shifted mindset. Soon after, Nicholas contacted me saying he could return earlier than planned. We arranged to visit the condominium together and hoped for the day to come quickly. All I could do was pray for Melissa's safety.
Stephanie, please protect that child. I beg of you.
I continued to plead in my heart. Finally, the day arrived. Leaving my house earlier than planned, Nicholas was not yet there. After informing him I'd enter first, I took the elevator to the apartment. Reaching the door, my heart raced. I mentally rehearsed what to say to Annabelle and braced myself before ringing the doorbell. I rang once, twice, but there was no response from inside. Unable to wait, I knocked on the door.
Laura here. Annabelle. Melissa. If you're there, please answer.
I banged on the door loudly, but there was no response at all. Just as I was about to leave, thinking they might have gone out, I heard the sound of a key turning. When the door opened, there stood Melissa. She looked anxious, but her face lit up when she saw me.
Granny!
She exclaimed briefly and hugged me tightly. I picked up Melissa and went inside. The room was eerily quiet, and Annabelle was nowhere to be seen.
Melissa, did Annabelle go out somewhere?
Melissa just nodded in response to my question. As we moved further into the house and reached the living room, I noticed half-eaten snacks on the table. I put Melissa down and asked her again.
It's lunchtime, but you were eating snacks?
Yeah. When Dad's not here, Santa Claus comes and brings me snacks. I decided to ask Melissa about the doubt that had been on my mind since the other day.
Melissa, who is this Santa Claus?
While eating the snacks, Melissa shook her head.
I don't know. He comes on days when Dad's not here and brings lots of stuff. Mom looks so happy about it. What does Mom say about him? Does she mention Santa Claus's name?
Melissa tilted her head in confusion.
I don't know. She always leaves with Santa Claus quickly. Only Mom comes back. So, Santa Claus visits often because you're a good girl. But Dad doesn't know, right?
Yeah. Dad's never met Santa Claus. Mom says not to tell Dad because it would upset Santa Claus. Hearing this, I was convinced that Annabelle was entertaining an unknown man while Nicholas was away. Presumably, that's what she planned when I tried to deliver the sweater. That would explain Annabelle's behavior at that time. And Melissa, receiving sweets and toys, really is believing in Santa Claus. A cheap way to keep her quiet. That's when I noticed Melissa's clothes were dirty.
Melissa, stay here for a moment.
I had a bad feeling. Looking around the house, my fears were confirmed. Dirty clothes scattered everywhere, unwashed dishes piled up in the kitchen. Carefully avoiding the mess, I opened the fridge. It was nearly empty, with only expired food inside. Shocked by the state of things, I returned to the living room. Melissa was gobbling up the sweets. Melissa, are you hungry? Haven't you eaten? I'm hungry because I haven't ate. That's why I like eating the sweets Santa Claus gives me. I hugged Melissa tightly, gently stroking her head. It's too much for such a young child to endure. How could I face Stephanie in heaven now? As I loosened my embrace, Nicholas arrived. Entering the room and setting down his bag, he sighed as he looked around. This is a mess.
Dad! Welcome back!
Melissa quickly left my side and hugged Nicholas.
Melissa, have you been a good girl?
Nicholas embraced her, gently stroking her head as I had.
Nicholas, can you watch Melissa? She hasn't eaten anything. I'm going to the supermarket to buy some groceries. Understood. I appreciate it.
I hurriedly left and bought essential groceries. Back home, I cleaned the kitchen and cooked a meal. Melissa ate hungrily. Meanwhile, Nicholas and I cleaned the room and secured evidence of Annabelle's infidelity. We discussed how to confront Annabelle with the truth. During our talk, Nicholas sensed Annabelle's return and retreated to the back room. I'm home.
You better have not done anything.
Annabelle entered, noticing me, and dropped her bag.
Laura! What are you doing here?
She looked around the room and went to the kitchen. And then approached me angrily.
Unbelievable. You just come in and use the kitchen? That's outrageous even for you.
Annabelle's anger didn't seem to subside. And then she directed her anger at Melissa.
Melissa! You opened the door for her. Why do you always do such unnecessary things?
Melissa dropped her chopsticks to the floor and clung to Annabelle's legs, crying loudly. Mom, I'm sorry. I won't do anything bad again. Please forgive me. Annabelle, there's no need to speak like that. Melissa was waiting here hungry the whole time. Annabelle, her face twisted in anger, let out a heavy sigh.
I don't need to be lectured. Melissa is my child. Laura, please don't interfere.
I clenched my fists involuntarily. Yes, her words weren't wrong. But I couldn't overlook this situation for Melissa's sake. But this is like neglecting a child. I understand it's tough with Nicholas being busy. If that's the case, you should have asked me for help.
Enough. Just leave now. I'll ask Nicholas to have a word with you. There's no need for that.
Nicholas, unable to bear Annabelle's harsh words any longer, emerged from his hiding spot. Annabelle was surprised to see him.
Nicholas, you're back already. That was quick. Was work all right?
Annabelle desperately tried to cover up her actions. But it was too late for such efforts. Still, Annabelle seemed oblivious, continuing to speak sweetly to Nicholas.
If you had told me you were coming back early, I would have cleaned up and prepared a feast.
But those words no longer had any effect on me or Nicholas. Nicholas signaled me with his eyes. Understanding immediately, I took Melissa's hand.
Melissa, you're full now, right? Let's watch TV together.
I took Melissa to another room and turned on the TV. Although she was sobbing, she soon became engrossed in the TV.
Melissa, watch TV for a bit. I'm going to clean up.
Okay. Leaving my smiling granddaughter watching TV, I returned to the living room. Nicholas and Annabelle were seated facing each other at the dining table. Annabelle had changed completely from her earlier coyness, now sitting quietly, looking down. Nicholas sat with his arms crossed, staring intently at Annabelle. I sat down next to Nicholas. Taking that as a cue, Nicholas began to speak.
So, can you explain what all this is about?
Annabelle bit her lip, not answering.
Listen, Annabelle. I'm not trying to blame you. I share the responsibility, too. I was too busy with work to help with childcare.
Then Annabelle suddenly looked up and glared at Nicholas.
That's right. It's all your fault for dumping everything on me. You're never home, and Melissa is a handful. It was hard. So, you cheated on him.
I calmly responded to Annabelle's defiant attitude. In her panic, Annabelle started blurting out things we hadn't even asked.
I did love Nicholas, you know. Since I joined the company. I thought Stephanie's death was my chance, so I married him, but now I regret it.
She continued, taking advantage of our silence.
But look at Nicholas. He's gotten old.
Look at that belly. It's embarrassing. I'm disillusioned.
I'm still young and I want to have fun.
Is that too much to ask? I involuntarily glanced at Nicholas. But he didn't seem particularly angry.
I get what you're saying. So, who is your affair partner?
A friend from my student days, Hugo. We happened to meet recently. He's still wonderful, unlike you. After saying this, Annabelle looked up at the ceiling.
I shouldn't have married. Melissa is becoming more like Stephanie and is not cute at all. But Hugo likes kids, so she was useful in that matter.
Suddenly, Nicholas slammed his fist on the table. Both Annabelle and I were startled and tensed up. Nicholas glared at Annabelle with anger-filled eyes.
You think because I don't say anything, you can keep this up? I was going to forgive you, but you keep spouting nonsense.
Annabelle seemed completely frightened by this side of Nicholas. I swallowed hard, impressed by his intensity.
Mock me all you want, but I won't tolerate you talking about Melissa like that. It's over. We're getting a divorce. I'll be seeking alimony, too. Wait.
Annabelle's complexion changed the moment she heard divorce. She realized she had said too much. I won't divorce. I'll apologize for overstepping. I regret what I did to Melissa, and I'll break up with Hugo. Please forgive me.
No, we're separating. Even if I forgave you now, you'd just do it again. My mind is made up.
I had never seen Nicholas with such a cold expression. Annabelle's anger flared up again at his unchanging decision.
Stop it. You just admitted it's your fault. I won't allow a divorce.
Hearing this, Nicholas slowly took out his mobile phone and placed it on the table. He operated the screen, and Annabelle's voice started playing. As soon as she heard it, she became silent and seemed to come to her senses. Her earlier statements echoed through the room.
As you can hear, I recorded your voice. I have evidence of the state of the room and your affair. So, there's no chance of winning for you.
Thus, Annabelle finally compromised and accepted the divorce. For the time being, I took custody of Melissa. It was decided because Nicholas was busy, and it was deemed unsafe to leave her with Annabelle. During the divorce mediation, I started taking Melissa to the cafe with permission. The regular customers were smitten with her and even helped look after her. When I explained the situation to them, one of them, a former detective, suggested filing a criminal complaint. With enough evidence, it would be possible, he advised. I immediately informed Nicholas, and we began preparations for a criminal case. Simultaneously, the divorce mediation also progressed smoothly. Thanks to the evidence we had secured in advance, Nicholas successfully gained custody. I am truly glad I consulted with Nicholas at that time. Regarding alimony, since Nicholas also had some fault, the amount wasn't significant. However, Annabelle couldn't afford it, so her parents agreed to pay on her behalf. Subsequently, Annabelle was arrested. Following the trial, she is now incarcerated. Melissa was anxious until the turmoil settled, but she quickly cheered up thanks to the regular customers and our emotional support. On my recommendation, Nicholas moved to a nearby neighborhood. He's still busy with work, so when he's on business trips, Melissa stays at my house. Our greatest joy is doing knitting together and watching TV. Melissa increasingly resembles Stephanie. Seeing Stephanie's reflection in Melissa's smile, we are all living a happy life. Factory worker father? Breaking off the engagement. As soon as she said that, Edith, my mother-in-law, threw her coffee at my dad. Beside her, laughing, my father-in-law, John, made no move to stop Edith. Coffee stains quickly spread across the suit Dad had specially cleaned for this day. Fortunately, the coffee was lukewarm and there was no risk of a burn. I offered Dad a handkerchief in surprise, while Timothy frantically tried to clean his suit. While worrying about any injuries, Timothy scolded his parents, who just kept laughing. During this, Dad said nothing, simply stood up, pointed at them, and declared, "Then I'll just have to ruin your company." He said this in a voice I had never heard before, took my hand, and we left the house. Behind us, Timothy's shouts at his parents echoed, and soon he followed us. "I'm terribly sorry. I'll make sure my parents apologize later." "No need. It's over. We're cutting ties," he said somberly, patting Timothy on the shoulder. "My name is Penelope, a 26-year-old office worker. My family has a bit of a unique situation. I grew up without a mom. She passed away when I was young, and Dad raised me single-handedly. Despite being busy as a factory manager, he never missed a school event. He'd often rush back to work after these events, but I've always respected him deeply for it. During college, I dated Timothy, who was 2 years my senior. He was gentle, sincere, and popular at university. Despite knowing it was a long shot, I confessed to him, and he accepted. However, Timothy had his worries, mainly about his parents. He spoke of them only in vague terms, never delving into details. It seemed there was some conflict with them, but I didn't press, though it troubled me. Still, Timothy himself was flawless, so our relationship continued. He lived alone since starting university, but occasionally visited his parents. He'd return exhausted, clearly stressed about them. He always put me first, making him my pride and joy. I had always wanted to introduce him to Dad, the man I respected and my beloved boyfriend. I wondered how they would react to each other. One day, while on a date, we unexpectedly bumped into Dad. "Oh, Dad. Aren't you supposed to be at work? What are you doing here?" "Ah, Penelope. Just returning from a client." "And who's this?" "Oh, this is Timothy. We're dating." Dad, not usually stern but with a somewhat fierce look, can be misunderstood. Timothy was very nervous meeting Dad for the first time. "Nice to meet you, I'm Timothy. I am fortunate to be dating Penelope." Timothy greeted Dad quickly in a tense manner. Dad warmly accepted him, chatting and laughing with him. "So, you're Penelope's boyfriend. Don't be so nervous. Take good care of her.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
As they continued talking, Timothy's nervousness faded, and they got along well. I was relieved to see the two most important men in my life getting along. I had worried about Dad's reaction, but he had to return to work. So we parted ways. After Dad left, I turned to Timothy, who seemed to be in a daze. When I asked what was wrong, he suddenly became excited.
That was really your dad, right?
I was puzzled by his unexpected words, but since it was the truth, I answered without hesitation.
Yes, that was my dad.
Is there something wrong with that?
Right, that makes sense. That was him, huh?
He crossed his arms and seemed lost in thought for a while. Curious, I decided to ask him what was on his mind.
What are you thinking about so hard? Did you not like him?
No way, that's not it.
I do like him, but, well.
His hesitant reply was all I got, and any further questions were evaded. I became anxious as he wouldn't tell me the reason. I wondered if, despite his words, he actually found it hard to get along with my dad. And so, I began to worry unnecessarily. A few days later, Timothy called me out, saying he had something important to talk about. Maybe because of the recent meeting with my dad, I felt unusually nervous as I went to our meeting spot. When I arrived at the cafe, he was already there. Through the glass, I could see him looking downcast. This deepened my anxiety, but I decided to act cheerfully anyway. As I entered the cafe and approached him slowly, I said, "Timothy, sorry, did you wait long?" I crept up behind him and spoke, tapping his shoulder, which startled him.
"Penelope, you scared me."
Startled, he caught his breath as he saw me. And I was surprised to see how much I had startled him. He had been that deep in thought. Sitting opposite the still gloomy him, I placed our order. His continued gloom only increased my anxiety. Desperate to hear what was on his mind, I spoke to him. "Hey, Timothy. What's bothering you so much? Didn't you like my dad?" When I asked, Timothy looked up and immediately denied it.
"No, not at all. I actually respect your dad. That's why my.
He stopped mid-sentence and looked down again, causing me to sigh. Realizing I had no choice but to press for an answer, I asked directly.
"If you have a problem, I want to know. What's troubling you?"
He took a deep breath as if making up his mind, then began to share.
"I have something to tell you about my parents. It's a long story, but I need you to hear it all."
The story he shared was shocking. According to him, his parents lacked grace and only judged people by their education and jobs. He had suffered a lot because of them, as they habitually interfered with his life. Whenever he introduced a girlfriend, they would criticize her and drive her away. The women would leave, often in tears, breaking up with him. That's why he wanted to marry me, but was troubled about bringing up his parents. But that's not a problem. We just don't have to involve them after getting married, and endure only during the marriage proposal. Dad seemed to like Timothy, so what was the issue?
"I don't mind about that, it's okay. Dad liked you too, so don't worry."
"Really?
That makes me happy. When I first met your dad, I was shocked to see how different he was from my own parents. I thought, if I marry Penelope, I'll become the son of such a great dad, even if it's just by marriage. But getting married means your parents become mine too, and I couldn't make up my mind."
He brightened up when I mentioned Dad liked him, but then he sighed deeply again. However, an idea seemed to strike him, and he looked up, apologizing.
"When we go to my parents to announce our marriage, can your dad come with us? I want them to know such an admirable person exists. It might not change them immediately, but I hope it will make them rethink."
"Okay. I'll talk to Dad. But I wish you had told me this more straightforwardly."
"Oh, sorry. I'll properly do it now."
Realizing his oversight, he hastily made a proper marriage proposal. Having accepted his proposal, I decided to discuss it with Dad. Initially reluctant, Dad agreed to join us for the marriage proposal visit after Timothy asked. We then coordinated with Timothy to schedule a visit to his parents. On the day of the visit, we stood in front of Timothy's parents' house, all of us neatly dressed. It was my first time meeting Timothy's parents, and knowing their reputation made me nervous. Seeing us tense, Dad chuckled and reassured us.
Don't be so stiff. Timothy's parents are just overly concerned. Be confident.
Feeling reassured by Dad's pat on our shoulders, my tension eased slightly. As the appointed time arrived, Timothy rang the doorbell. But there was no sound inside, making us wonder if they were not home. In a bit of a panic, Timothy rang the bell again, but still no response. Feeling awkward in front of Dad, Timothy excused himself and went inside first. Dad and I exchanged glances, waiting silently for Timothy to return. After a short while, Timothy reappeared at the entrance, looking flustered. Before I could ask what happened, he started making excuses with a forced smile.
Sorry, I was just delayed. Please wait a bit longer, I'll be ready soon.
He quickly went back inside. Dad sighed in disbelief at this behavior, and I felt increasingly anxious. I feared this incident might derail the marriage talks. Though Dad is not quick-tempered, he dislikes dishonesty. So, I couldn't help but consider the worst-case scenario. As these thoughts crossed my mind, Timothy finally came back to the entrance. Apologizing, he invited us inside. Inside, Timothy's parents were already sitting on the sofa, but their demeanor was strange. Editham, his mother, greeted us with a sarcastic smile and arrogant attitude, while John, his father, seemed disinterested and looked away. Though we were led to the sitting room, the coffee served was lukewarm. Silent since our arrival, Timothy's behavior, and the tense atmosphere made me uneasy. However, knowing we needed to greet them, I tried to compose myself. As Timothy introduced his parents and us, I felt warmth in my heart from his considerate introduction of Dad and me. But his parents scoffed at our introduction, and the next moment, Edith's hand reached for her cup, shocking me.
Factory worker father?
Breaking off the engagement. As soon as she said that, Edith threw her coffee at Dad. Beside her, laughing, John made no move to stop Edith. Coffee stains quickly spread across the suit he had specially cleaned for this day. Fortunately, the coffee was lukewarm, and there was no risk of a burn. I offered Dad a handkerchief in surprise, while Timothy frantically tried to clean Dad's suit. While worrying about injuries, Timothy scolded his parents, who just kept laughing. During this, Dad said nothing, simply stood up, pointed at them, and declared,
"Then I'll just have to ruin your company."
He said this in a voice I had never heard before, took my hand, and we left the house. Behind us, Timothy's shouts at his parents echoed, and soon he followed us.
"I'm terribly sorry. I'll make sure my parents apologize later."
"No need. It's over.
We're cutting ties,"
Dad said somberly, patting Timothy on the shoulder. Then we went back to our house with Timothy, and Dad immediately changed his clothes. Meanwhile, Timothy earnestly apologized outside Dad's room, with Dad's troubled voice occasionally heard. But I was too shocked by Edith's actions to pay much attention to anything else. From the moment I saw their faces, I knew getting along would be difficult due to their arrogant attitude. But I never expected them to do something like that, and I was furious that they belittled Dad. Sitting on the living room sofa and clenching my fists, I kept replaying the earlier events. I knew getting worked up wouldn't help, but I couldn't help myself. Eventually, Dad came into the living room after changing, followed by Timothy, who immediately apologized to me.
"Penelope, I'm truly sorry. I had no idea they would do something like that, let alone belittle someone. I'm really sorry, I did a terrible thing."
Timothy probably knew it wasn't something easily forgiven. The fact he didn't ask for forgiveness showed his sincerity. This made me feel like I should apologize to him. I took Timothy's hand, who was on his knees, and apologized.
"I'm sorry too for saying something so thoughtless without knowing anything. I never expected it to turn out like this."
Then I turned to Dad to offer my deepest apology.
"Dad, I'm sorry too. My careless suggestion led to this mess.
Dad just looked down and shrugged his shoulders in response to my apology. It's no wonder he didn't say anything. This situation was unexpected for everyone here. But this meant his earlier words might actually come true. I decided to ask him directly about his intentions.
Dad, what you said to them earlier, was that true? Are you really planning to ruin their company?
In response to my question, Dad looked at Timothy and then nodded firmly.
Yes, it's true. I do intend to do it. His company's performance has been poor, and I've been thinking about what to do with it. It's a good opportunity to cut it off.
Dad's eyes were serious and unwavering. He is the owner of a factory, a well-known leading local company where he started as a worker. He first worked as a worker at this factory. He gave up his dream of becoming a painter after Mom passed away to raise me alone. Working tirelessly in the factory, his hard work was recognized, and he climbed the ranks. Eventually, he was favored by the previous president and promoted repeatedly. When the previous president, or rather, the former factory manager, wanted to retire, Dad was chosen to take over. The factory owns several subsidiaries, and one of them is managed by John, Timothy's father. This was revealed during the earlier greeting. John should have recognized this, but he failed to, as Edith acted first, before Timothy introduced him in detail. Timothy just wanted to say that Dad worked in the factory, which is the parent company of John's. But Edith and John's prejudice led to this unfortunate situation. If they had listened properly, this might not have happened. Dad said John's company seemed to be mismanaged. This could potentially affect Dad's factory, so he had been considering what action to take.
I was thinking of layoffs to improve management, but I'd rather avoid that if possible. It seemed like the right time to make a cut.
He smiled troubledly, probably not wanting to lay off employees. Regret tinged his words. After saying this, he turned to Timothy and said in a low voice,
I've decided to do it, but it means your parents will be in trouble. It's harsh, but are you sure you're okay with this?
Faced with this question, Timothy hesitated for a moment but then looked Dad in the eye and replied, I've already cut ties with them. They did unforgivable things. They need to atone for it, and I want them to reflect on this incident and everything else. More than that, I have a request. It's inappropriate at this time, but I must ask, please let me get engaged to Penelope. I'm aware of the trouble my parents caused. More than anything, I want to be with Penelope. Please allow it. Dad crossed his arms, deep in thought. It may seem inconsiderate right after such an incident. However, moved by Timothy's fervor, I also pleaded with Dad.
I also ask you, Dad. Despite everything, I want to be with Timothy.
After hearing our pleas, Dad hummed for a bit before shaking his head as if resigned.
If both of you feel the same, then it's fine. But there's a condition. Your parents are business owners, after all. I want to know what will happen to their employees. If you can't answer that, your marriage is off.
Dad said this and sent Timothy out, not even glancing at me before returning to his room. A few days later, Timothy came with a plan regarding John's company's employees. He had promised Dad beforehand and was discussing it when I returned from work. Apparently, Timothy had listed potential new jobs for all the employees and was showing it to Dad.
So, I would like to ask, albeit presumptuously, for these employees to transfer to your company. I hope to support their employment there, contributing to the business's growth.
Timothy was earnestly requesting Dad to hire them.
And I know it's selfish, but I would like to join the company too. I'll work without salary until their work stabilizes and shows results. I want to compensate for the shortcomings with my work and salary. Once that's done, I'd like to marry Penelope.
Timothy seemed to blame himself for the company's downfall. He wanted to work hard as a lubricant in the situation. I was just learning now that our marriage would be delayed, but it seemed unavoidable.
Welcome back, Penelope. You heard, right? I'm sorry for deciding something so important on my own. But I couldn't be happy just myself. That's too much, Timothy. Dad, let me join the company too. I'll work alongside Timothy, so please accept his proposal.
As I said this, Timothy tried to stop me. But I refused to back down and desperately begged Dad. While we were doing this, Dad remained silent. But after our repeated pleas, he finally unfolded his arms and quietly nodded. Meanwhile, Timothy's parents hadn't apologized yet. Dad had been waiting these past days, but that was coming to an end.
Time's up,
he muttered, beginning preparations to take over John's company. Time passed, and John's company finally collapsed. Then, Timothy received a furious call from his parents, and the three of us were summoned to their house. When we arrived at their home, it was crowded with people. They were all protesting the company's collapse, shouting angrily. John probably hadn't explained anything to the employees. By calling us there, it seemed they intended to shift their own blunders onto us. As soon as they spotted us, they began pointing and accusing.
Look there! They're the cause of everything, not me. They destroyed the company, not me. It's true. Especially that woman, she seduced our son and ingratiated herself with his father. We're the victims here. So stop making such a fuss.
As Timothy's parents ranted, trying to deflect from themselves. Although he got angry with his parents saying whatever they want, he was trying to soothe the protesting crowd.
Please wait, everyone. Yes, my father's company collapsed, but it's because of those two. And I've arranged job placements for all of you. Please hear me out.
The crowd gradually quieted down, and they began listening to us. Timothy read out each person's name, informing them of their next job. The former employees, who realized that they won't get laid off, seemed relieved. After announcing everyone's new positions, Timothy's parents started causing a scene.
Hey, Timothy. What about us? Why ignore us? Tell us our job placements. If you do, we'll forgive that man and even approve your marriage to that woman.
Ignoring their wailing, Timothy began explaining the circumstances of the company's downfall. The former employees, who realized that they won't be laid off, seemed relieved.
Which is why I'm truly sorry for the trouble. Thanks to our generous president, your jobs are saved. Please, let's start anew without anger.
Turning to Dad, Timothy gave an expression of gratitude.
We've caused so much trouble. Thank you for indulging our selfishness. I promise to work diligently.
The former employees, moved by Timothy's actions, also appreciate Dad. Amidst this, his parents were the only ones dissenting.
Don't be fooled. That man destroyed the company, and she instigated it. Face reality. You've lost your jobs because of them, right? Just because they've helped you now doesn't mean you should lose sight of the truth.
Despite their desperate appeals, no one paid any attention to Timothy's parents. Especially after hearing the whole story from Timothy earlier. Even Dad ignored their words. As the former employees looked on, hoping for reassurance, Dad told them that he would inform them of the details later, which brought voices of relief. The employees left the house. Once everyone was gone and it became quiet, Timothy's parents started complaining about how they couldn't live anymore.
The company's collapse means we'll lose this house, which was the collateral. Yes, exactly. Where are we supposed to live now?
Timothy sighed in exasperation at his parents, who were determined to blame us.
It's obviously your own fault. Maybe it's time you learned a bit of self-reflection.
He rebuked them, but it seemed they had no intention of listening. Unable to bear it anymore, I finally burst out in anger.
After all the trouble you've caused Timothy, getting carried away because you were business owners. Isn't this all because you only cared about titles?
My words prompted them to retort. But Dad intervened, not letting them speak.
A business owner is responsible. Taking responsibility is part of the job. Do your last duty properly.
Receiving a stern scolding from each of us, they were left speechless. Leaving the two of them behind, we departed from there. Eventually, they lost everything: the company, the house, and the land. They didn't offer any compensation to the former employees and seemed to have dodged the issue. However, having lost everything, they ended up arrested for dine and dash. They contacted Timothy for help, but he coldly refused, having cut ties with them. They're probably in jail now. Since then, we've received no contact from them. Even if they got out, they still had to atone for their actions towards the former employees. Timothy and I quit our jobs and joined Dad's company. For the first few months, we lived off our savings and worked without a salary, as promised. One day, we met some of the employees from Timothy's parents' company. Recognizing us, they rushed over, eagerly shaking our hands, expressing gratitude for the new job, and thanking Dad for taking them in. They thanked Timothy for arranging it and thanked me for my help. I didn't remember, but I had helped them with some documents when they first joined. Grateful for everything, they left, saying they'd continue to work hard. Hearing this, we felt relieved and hurried to Dad's office. He warmly welcomed us in his office and handed us thick envelopes.
"What is this?" "It's your unpaid salaries. It didn't all fit in one envelope, so there are several."
Dad chuckled, leaving us astonished. We hadn't been here long enough to compensate for employing many new workers. Yet, we were being given our salaries. Bewildered, we just stood there. But Dad continued, thanking us.
"Thanks to you, they work with enthusiasm. They always express their gratitude and worry about you. I couldn't shame myself by not paying such excellent employees. And our performance has definitely improved. Thank you."
Hearing this, we embraced and cried together. We had been so focused on ourselves that we're unable to see anything else around us. But more than that, we were moved by their concern for us. Then Dad said something even more heartwarming.
"Timothy, I'm impressed with your leadership. If my daughter agrees, will you marry her?"
"Yes. Yes, of course. I promise I'll make her happy." With a tear-streaked face, Timothy promised me and Dad. I hugged him and cried together. So, we got married. We continue to work together at Dad's company, living happily. Gradually, work has become more efficient, allowing us to have a broader view of the company, even discussing productivity with Dad. Timothy visits the factory and subsidiaries, asking about inconveniences and proposing solutions, staying very busy. We both work with more passion than at our previous jobs. Finding fulfillment really does change one's work ethic. But soon, that will have to be put on hold. I'm taking maternity leave from Dad's company. Dad, Timothy, everyone at the company, and I are all looking forward to the arrival of our grandchild.